So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to the rarest of things these days, because this is a completely new custom map that we haven't seen before, but it's on the old patch of the game. It's not actually on the new version, so it was made by Farkin, I believe, who assumingly does not have access to the test build as it stands, so maybe this isn't a complete impossibility moving forward either. But as you can see, it's a Dwarven inspired map, and this Dwarven keep, which appears to be under the current custody of the Orcs of the Misty Mountains and the dark forces of Angmar, and we're going to see an attempted reclamation here, I suppose. I mean, the interior of this settlement is one that we have seen before. This is a module that does exist outside of this map as well. You can see it's kind of meant to be sort of the interior of Erebor, though in this case I don't believe that's the intent. But still, the Misty Mountains are here. The interior of the settlement is also quite wide open, so I don't know how the defenders are going to choose to set up and defend. The outer part of the settlement is probably a better defensive position actually, because of the layers and the areas you can get skirmishers into, albeit neither the Misty Mountains nor Angmar are particularly adept in those areas, so we'll have to wait and see. But it is a fairly grueling climb up to the front of the settlement, so it's going to be interesting to see how the dwarves actually do set themselves up. It's a fairly long battle on the face of it, at 50,000 frames, but I imagine we're going to have to wait quite a while for these dwarven armies over here at the edge of the map to slowly trudge their way over. Interesting to see this little cliffside path as well, which does actually offer a completely different way up as well, so they're not going to have the same initial challenges perhaps as that Erebor army down there. But let's go through the attacking armies first and foremost, or do our best to go through Smeagol has a Beard's army over here, playing as Erebor. So Ironfoot Pikes are in there. Of course, this being the older version of the game, the Ironfoot Pikes do not have shields, so that is something worth bearing in mind. Ironfoot Warriors are in there as well, unupgraded. I think it is a 3v3, so the quality should be in the favour of the attackers today, which, considering they're the dwarves, that is a pretty big advantage for them to have. If it does turn into just a pure slogfest, even Angmar with their defensive prowess are not really going to be able to match the quality and indeed the heavy hitting nature of many of the dwarven elites. And you can see there are Axguard of Erebor in there as well, which will be very good against most of these orcs. There are Sons of Durin in there still in this version of the game, of course, the bodyguard variant as well, so very, very powerful with the armor piercing damage. Ironfoot Axe Throwers, which will be very good at busting through the phalanxes that both of the defending factions today do have the ability to create. Ironfoot Crossbows as well. Based on the terrain, the crossbows might be a little bit more difficult to use, but you have to bring them because they are an excellent supporting unit if you can get them into the right position. And the Dwarven Crossbows, among all of the basic crossbows, are the most resilient anyway, so you can get away with a little bit more than you would do, say, if it were Rune with their Eastrons. And that's pretty much all I can make out. I'm sure there are other bodyguard units in there as well. You can see the general sort of poking out over the top. Yeah, Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, more armor piercing, very, very dangerous. Moving on to the second attacking army, we actually have Dale, so maybe I guess it must be a facsimile of Erebor. So I will name it as such. But Bacon Soup is playing as Dale in support of their dwarven allies. They do offer a little bit more in terms of numbers, of course, maybe not so much in the same high-end quality in terms of infantry, but they do offer more long range than Erebor are typically capable of fielding. So Dismounted Earls of Dale, though, still a very strong unit of line infantry, maybe not as strong as some of the upper mid-tier dwarven units, but they still have a good amount of damage that they can deal, and of course the armour that they don is also pretty good as well, certainly better than what the orcs can do. The Guardians of Khan Doom maybe have a better shield value, but that would be the only advantage they have over the Earls in terms of straight up facing them in combat. Barding Herd, more armor piercing, of course, an armor piercing phalanx, and like the other upper mid-tier units of Dale, they also pack on that armor. Again, it's not quite to the same level as the dwarves, but it's still enough in this sort of situation, especially for a halberd unit, which do typically tend to be a little bit more fragile. The Barding Herd are one of the more resilient examples with that heavy lamella that they wear. Dalian Bowmen, unsurprising to see Dale invest a little bit into their archers, of course. You know, it's part of the centre of what makes them what they are as a faction. And of course, with Erebor not having access to such things, it makes sense for Dale to pick up the slack a little bit there. You can also try and offset the fact that if the orcs do set themselves up on the outer hills, it will naturally make them a little bit more exposed to Dale's archers. You can see the Swordmasters of Escaroth are in there, nice amount of damage, especially against the lowly tier of orcs. Lake Town pikemen, obviously not as resilient nor as damaging as the Barding Herd, but they do have a little bit more range, and they are of course far cheaper, so having more phalanx units for Dale there. We also have the Dalian Royal Guard and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, so Dale often do this because the Dalian Royal Guard, very resilient and also one of the better units of infantry that Dale can field, and the Blackshots with their armour-piercing arrows of course are always going to be almost a must-bring really, with their handheld wind lances. And finally for the attackers, a little bit more, well, a little bit easier to see what this army is all about with Dex Jetster. He has got several units of Ironfoot Spears here, so again a little bit more defensively minded, set up maybe to potentially have to deal with the Sally Forth, but I doubt it was ever going to be the case that the Orcs would charge down here. They would never surrender such an extreme hill advantage. A couple of units of Ironfoot crossbows, once again always going to bring them, good supporting tool, and they can also bully Angmar at long range. I mean, Angmar not necessarily used to operating in this kind of situation where they have the terrain to really take advantage of ranged power, the Witches of course being a very dangerous unit to use at range, but they're really the only one that you would say are truly dangerous in Angmar's hands. Ironfoot Halberds, again we just mentioned the Barding Herd being a resilient unit of Halberds, the Ironfoots as well. Again, more armour-piercing damage, plenty of phalanx units here, which is all well and good. If they can get themselves situated here, the attackers, they should be able to dictate the pace of the melee engagement, but if they do get caught out, especially against the Misty Mountains crossbows and the like, this could prove to be a little bit of a mistake, but several units of Ironfoot pikes. Regardless of that, we have some Ironfoot Wargoats as well, so some fast movers isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. You can actually go around there, which is a little bit of a shame, because otherwise you could find your way getting in behind enemy lines, but the red line I think means that you definitely won't be able to go that way. So not going to be able to take advantage of that, but if they can get up the hill, get in and amongst the enemy a little bit, the cavalry could yet prove to be a worthwhile addition. A couple more units of the Axe Guard of Erebor, very dangerous of course, and then back here, Erebor Legionaries, a couple units of them, and also the Sons of Durin, although instead of the Dragon Slayers they've gone for the more defensively minded Highborns of Erebor, so they'll last longer in melee but do a little bit less damage, but there's plenty of other sources for the dwarves to deal damage, so there's no wrong answer there. Both of those units are very, very powerful. Now then, for the defenders, perhaps not in their natural habitat here, are Angmar, played by Farkin himself, who is the map creator I believe, and certainly sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Snaga Archers, which usually Angmar would maybe forego, but considering the situation it's probably for the best that they have brought them. The dwarves will be able to absorb their damage fairly easily, outside of maybe the phalanx units who will take a bit of damage from them. But yeah, they're just going to be here in support of the main Angmar force. I mean, Angmar are going to be more resilient up front than their two Misty Mountains counterparts today. It's still going to be a bit of a struggle for them against the dwarves for the reasons I've said, but at the very least they won't fold like wet tissue paper. Combination of Witch Round Pikemen and Gundabad Guard being a good defensive set. The Witch Round Blackguard, of course, high quality units that Angmar have are often able to keep pace with some of the very best. Even if they don't outright win those fights, they can at least be in and around that same level. Snaga Stalkers also hidden behind here, so having to make do with some lower tier units. It'll be interesting to see how these initial defensive setups do work out. Orc Fellas were a bit of extra armour piercing for a relatively small outlay. I mean, they're going to struggle in a prolonged fight, but if you can use them at the right time, it's exactly the sort of shot in the arm in terms of damage that could be really, really useful. I mean, 4 units on them is a lot as well. That's over 200 per unit. The Barrow-wights, natural inclusion really. Again, this is the old unit model for the Barrow-wights, of course, but no faction can kill them off that quickly in melee. The best way to deal with them is with a cavalry charge, which the attackers do have, but I don't know if they'll necessarily be able to get them into the right place. I mean, there are also Warg Riders here as well, so Wargs may be going to be trying to charge into the attackers as they move forward, so the empty space could be exploited by both attacker and defender today. A couple of units of Scourge Raiders throwing axes, always going to be useful as well, dealing with those phalanx units in particular, and the upgrade of Witch-Arm Hammer Guard, which were going to be a no-brainer. When you're facing off against this many dwarves, this level of armour piercing cannot be ignored. Now then, moving on to Colonel Speaks 46, playing as one of the 2 Misty Mountains armies. We already briefly mentioned Heavy Goblin Crossbows. Going to be slightly easier to use them than the Ironfoots, even if the Ironfoots are the better unit, purely because the terrain favours the defender, and of course these crossbows are going to be another one of the ways in which they can try and bridge that gap in terms of the quality difference between the Dwarven attackers and the defenders today, which they're going to need to. The Dwarves will be doing everything in their power to ensure it is a simple, straight-up tussle in melee. The defenders will be doing everything they can to try and ensure that there are outside factors involved. There are some Goblin King's bodyguard here, Snaga skirmishers hidden, plenty of heavy Goblin halberds and spears, which are relatively cheap armor-piercing units and numerous as well. So they will be able to clog up a lot of choke points with them, which is going to be one of their main ways of operating as well. There are heavy Goblin infantry, they're going to struggle. Not at the required level really to do huge amounts of damage to the opposition, but they are extremely cheap and very, very numerous, so they will be best combined with other units like the Fearmongers here. I did also see Blackback Mountain Berserkers pop up on the tooltip very briefly as well, which again is not too surprising given that they are the only unit really of Misty Mountain's units which can actively damage the dwarves quickly, even the high-end units. And then Flame of the West, playing as the other Misty Mountains army. He's brought some Snow Trolls, the old model for the Snow Trolls, of course, which has existed ever since Vanilla 3rd Age. They're going to be here. They're pretty quick, of course, and in this old version of the game, however, Trolls are not quite as impressive, so they have to be used at the right time to really be effective. They could also try and barge their way in behind enemy lines and go after some squishy skirmishers, perhaps. Standard heavy Goblin Archers, be looking for them to get outside and get into a good position to start firing into the enemy as they move forward as well. They'll struggle if they get into a skirmish fight with Dale, however. We have some more Snaga in there, more Goblin King's bodyguard, more White Uruk Fearmongers, plenty of spears and halberds once again. Bolg's Champions are here as well though, by far and away the most devastating unit of cavalry on the field that we've seen so far, especially in this older version of the game as well. This type of cavalry is going to be the most important, and yeah, Bolg's Champions are going to be capable of dishing out some real punishments. I mean, it's been a bit of a theme in this battle so far that everyone other than the Angmar and Erebor army out on the flank over there has had their units in one giant blob, so it's kind of difficult to see exactly what they have going on, but it will make itself known, I'm sure, as the fight goes along. But, of course, there's going to be a fairly lengthy cut for this battle, because I highly doubt that Erebor are going to start marching up the hill immediately, because they'll get collapsed upon by more than one defending army, so there's probably going to be a fairly lengthy period of time here as the attackers start to trudge their way into position and ready their assault on this Dwarven hold. So I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to begin. Well, I'd be lying if I wasn't concerned that I'm rejoining the battle this early on, considering the fact that these Snaga archers are shooting into the dwarves as they attempt to move up, and it looks as though they've actually had a fair amount of luck so far. Unfortunately, Erebor as well would have to use their crossbows on these Snaga archers if they were to attempt to counter skirmish, and they would have to move forwards as well, given the very extreme terrain advantage that the Angmarim currently hold. But I don't think Erebor really have too much of a choice in this matter. They've got to send something up there, otherwise they will just be taking all of this free damage, and their allies are still some ways away. I mean, Dale are getting there now, but the dwarves in behind them are still trudging up this way as well. The dwarves are going to be splitting their attentions a little bit between helping the Dalians and helping their fellow dwarves down there. Lake Town infantry also moving forwards to offer a little bit of ranged pressure as the Snow Trolls reveal themselves. I mean, the Trolls in this version are not quite as scary as they would otherwise be, so the Dismounted Earls may very well be sufficient in that on their own, especially in conjunction with the Lake Town infantry. But now we also have the Bolg's Champions moving forward, so not moving forward with enough here. Dale trying to get away, sending forward a more limited amount of troops. They're going to need to send forward something else in support as well now, or well, there are some ranged units here, but they're going to get absolutely flattened by the Bolg's Champions. So far this has started off pretty well for the defenders. The attackers trying to get away with sending more meagre amounts of troops to the front line, and still no anti-cavalry either. It would definitely have helped them out a little bit to send forward at the very least the Lake Town pikemen. That would have been more than enough to ward off the Bolg's Champions, and Swordmaster of Esgaroth would have offered a slightly more damaging alternative to really deal with these Snow Trolls very quickly. But the Earls of Dale are doing a pretty decent job of that in their own right anyway. Good quality unit of line infantry that they are. More goblins moving forward though. I mean, content to make this battle a little bit messier, the defenders, on this occasion. The orcs with their numbers do tend to prefer that style of fighting. Heavy goblin spears with some goblin infantry backing them up, that's numerous, and the armour piercing edge will help them against the earls. Dale, however, also winded as a result of the extreme climb they've already gone into. Again, not really learning their lesson here, Dale. All too content to continue to send non-anti-cavalry units into the teeth of the Volk's champions, which are a very, very dangerous unit of cavalry off the charge, and you can't afford to lose high-quality units of line infantry like this for free. I don't really know what the late town pikemen, you could argue that in formation they're slower, but you could simply take them out of formation and run them forwards in an emergency like this. Anyway, still the game of cat and mouse continues. The Snaga archers once again moving down. It's going to have to be the case for Dale here, or for Erebor I should say. They're going to have to move forward with more than this, because otherwise this is going to be their fate for pretty much the rest of the battle. There's a lot of Snaga skirmishes coming down here now as well, which means, you know, this position is going to be a little bit more fortified than it would have been had they simply thrown caution to the wind earlier. I can see why they didn't do that, because their allies weren't ready, but now that Dale are actually engaged, you can't waste all your time waiting for the dwarven reinforcements to arrive from the other dwarf army. Crossbows still biding their time and waiting, but I mean, there's a lot of free damage that these Snaga archers are able to inflict so far. I did mention the Ironfoot crossbows' resilience at the start of the fight with their armour and their shields, but when there's no response, all of that damage does add up over time. Meanwhile, continuing to push forward this unit of earls, the Volk's champions are now shaken, continuing to take a fair amount of damage. The javelins now in close proximity, so at this point all of the range damage is starting to add up on them, but it's a lot of range damage which has not been done to their actual defensive lines, so the Volk's champions have definitely done a good job so far, and they're still in good enough condition to be used later on as well, if Colonel Speaks does want to retreat them a little bit. Earls of Dale, meanwhile, easily going to be up to the task of finishing off goblin infantry en masse. In conjunction with heavy goblin spears and barrow-wights, however, they will need some more support on this front line if they are to have continued success over here. More and more units starting to push their way forwards. The pikemen are now here, so unlikely that the Volk's champions will make a speedy return to this front line. Swordmasters of Askaroth and Barding Herd as well. And then the dwarves also making their appearance a little bit further back. Snaga archers still making the dwarves' life a little bit more miserable over there. Earls of Dale now shaken, peeling themselves off the front line. Don't really know for what purpose. Sending forward a fresh unit of earls now. At the very least they are sending forward some supports to help them. I don't really know why you would take this unit off the front line though. The attack would definitely benefit from having 65 more earls there anyway. Try and rest them up, I suppose, but against this level of opposition I don't think that's really the most important thing. Heavy goblin spears, of course, as we already mentioned, the armour piercing will be useful. A few of the earls do get skewered by them, but very, very quickly here the heavy goblin spears are starting to waver, and also the defenders trying to retreat their units, and I don't really understand why they tried to do that, because unsurprisingly the Misty Mountains end up routing as a result of that. When you try and peel your units away from a front line that's active, you're exposing them to a lot more damage and also a far higher chance of routing as they turn their backs on the enemy. And the Misty Mountains, more so than any other faction in the game, are going to be fairly susceptible to that sort of thing. So both sides making the same error in judgment, I think, but the Misty Mountains paying more dearly for it. Javelins coming in to try and give that extra spike of damage, which will be necessary against the barrow-wights as the arrows continue to fly overhead. Plenty of it just Lake Town infantry, but dealing with Snaga skirmishers, Goblin King's bodyguard available to help shore up the line should it be necessary. Victory seems certain for the defenders for now. I think it's a conjunction of the numbers and also the extreme amount of hit points the barrow-wights have at their disposal. Also there is javelin support coming in from the defenders, lest we forget. Defeat still seems so. I mean, the heavy goblin spears are a decent frontline force, as we already mentioned. The numbers that the goblins can bring to this sort of front line is going to be a potential problem for the attackers to have to work through. And those Earls are now routing, so they did rejoin the front line, did they? No. That initial unit of Earls, they died off pretty quickly. Those javelins must have really done the business. Crossbows also helping. Crossbows and javelins together. That's a great situation for Dale as they wheel forward some pikes to try and help shore things up from a melee standpoint, which will work, but it's more the range support which the attackers will be a little bit more worried about. They've got their own javelins which can be used as well. Dwarves now making their appearance on the front line as well, some unupgraded Ironfoot warriors. See dwarves tanky, but again with crossbow support I don't know whether that will actually be all that important. A second unit of snow trolls coming in. Good spot actually from the defenders there. Able to see the slightly more exposed river patrol and going to try and deny Dale that javelin support, which was being used to pretty good effect. And this flank is also starting to bend around a little bit. A good opportunity maybe for the defenders to turn the tables a little bit on the attackers. More Lake Town infantry piling forwards as well, so numbers and commitment is certainly not an issue for the attackers at this stage. Still not too interested in moving up that choke point over there for now, the dwarves, hoping perhaps for their allies to make some headway first, but that's a dangerous game to be playing, as is often the way. If you leave it too long you could end up having your allies defeated and then you have to face everything on your own. We're still quite a long way from that being the case, I think, based on how long this battle is. But that is a potential banana skin for later. And the snow trolls are well and truly in behind enemy lines at this point, really getting involved, and also heavy goblin infantry going with them, so a bit of support also. Not the highest quality support, but it's something nonetheless, and getting in and amongst the Dalian archer lines. Again, this sort of damage is important to Dale as well, to keep their attack trucking forwards in the right direction, so it's a good counter-attack this from the Misty Mountains. The black streaks, is that black shots? No, it's the Dalian Royal Guard. So they're close. Swordmass of Askaroth and Axguard of Erebor. I mean, pikes are coming in here as well, which actually won't be that good against the trolls, but there's enough high damage units over here now that the snow trolls should fall away pretty quickly. But the longer they can stay alive, the more this attack from the side of the line as well, from these Barrow-wights, can also start to take effect, and the worse it's going to get for the attackers on the front line over here. Fire being poured into the Snaga skirmishers as well. Barrow-wights still in good health as well. Still over 200 of them remaining. More units on the way across as well. Another unit of heavy goblin spears, 253 of them. And a good position for the Scourge Raiders to take up as well and to fire into the front line. So things are looking pretty grim now on the front line for the attackers. More and more of it is looking to be just Lake Town units, which are not going to last too long under extreme scrutiny. Hits coming in as well, going after heavy goblin halberds, not the worst of targets. You'll kill them off pretty quickly after all, but I think they need to smash into the front line with a little bit more now. Snow trolls almost completely gone. Again, 44 Ironfoots routing. Seeing dwarves turn tail and run. Lake Town units holding their ground for now, but that won't last too much longer. They're wavering. Some of them already routing. So this is going to be a complete failure, I think, this attack. They're going to have to completely reset the attackers. And they do have the numbers to do so, but more legionaries moving forwards now, but the defenders will be extremely pleased about that. Time and time again, of course, we've seen the defenders make a very good start to the battle, only for it to ebb away as things go on. So this is by no means the end of the matter for the attackers. They can reset reasonably easily, although the Lake Town pikemen here, moving forward, they're getting absolutely hammered. They need a unit in front of them, really. They need to be the anchor, not the first ones in. And I think maybe the attackers are panicking a little bit and they just want to get some units on the front line to keep the attack going, but it is a complete reset. Oof, the Axguard of Erebor as well. I mean, a nasty situation this. Which Scourge Raiders with pretty much the perfect shot down. We know how dangerous axe throwers can be. I think they just ran out of ammunition though. Not the most amount of ammo, the Scourge Raiders, but they're also not terrible in melee, so done their damage. We will now move forward toward Massive Escaroth and routing. Maybe trying to counter-attack around the side, but the Heavy Goblin Crossbows. I think this unit of Heavy Goblin Crossbows has quietly been the most effective unit on the field so far. They have a really nice, not perfect, but really nice line of sight onto the units that they're going to be shooting at. Legionaries as well. Are we starting to see any sort of attack down there? No, still absolutely nothing. This is still the only fight that's ongoing. I mean, stuff like Axguard of Erebor. The ranged units have been kings so far in this fight, I think. Now the Volks champions as well. They've definitely not been backwards and coming forwards, the defenders. They've really been willing to take advantage of gaps they've seen, and ultimately the attackers are not learning from what has happened before. They've once again left this whole area completely exposed. The Volks champions free to charge into the river patrol as a result. Nice bit of free damage there, and also denying javelin support once again to this renewed assault. Royal Guard making their way to the front lines, which will add a shot in the arm in terms of quality. I mean, there is a good amount of quality on the front line now. Barding Herd offering the pole arms, and then higher end Dwarven units as well, Erebor Legionaries leading the way, so it's going to be tough for these goblins. Again, the armour piercing from the Heavy Goblin Spears and Halberds will be giving them just that little bit of extra efficiency, but it's not going to be enough to give them the full victory. Behind the pikes on the way forwards as well now, so it will be just that one charge that the Volks champions are allowed to get, but every little helps. It will all add up in the long run. So these units guarding against an attack from up here. Ironfoot pikes getting hit by something at some point. Heavy Goblin crossbows maybe. Again, Dex Jetster has been maybe a little bit too willing to leave his units in harm's way, considering the dwarves down there still have very much not begun any sort of attack. Dalian archers going after the Witchround pikemen, perhaps. The armour of the Witchround pikemen will help them somewhat there, but it's not the worst unit you can go up against, and indeed you will want to be getting rid of them. You don't want to be facing off against mid to high tier pikes late on. That can make all the difference in the world. It didn't in the last battle we saw. It wasn't enough for Angmar there, but it may be here. You don't want to roll the dice if you don't have to. Now moving forward, out of ammunition, archers, goblin infantry, still those crossbows firing in. Gundabad Guard now moving across from that position over there. The dwarves do start to move forward now as a result of that. Heavy Goblin Spears are wavering. Not sure what they're doing. I mean, the way is open for the dwarves, but there's only 2 units that are anywhere near being able to take advantage of this newfound gap. We'll see. Gundabad Guard and Witchround pikemen now attempting to slam the door shut, or at least fortify the already shut door. Volks champions once again being afforded a way in. Again, there's only so many times you can feel bad for the attackers when this happens. They've once again been bamboozled by leaving that one gap in the front line. And the pikes are right there, like they could have just left the pikes there. I don't know what they gained from moving them centrally. In come the Volks champions right through the back of these units. That may very well be enough to rout some of the more fragile units on the front line, and indeed overwhelming force being applied now. The arrival of those heavy Angmar units means that the numbers are so heavily in favour of the defenders, and the Volks champions helping out with that as well, that it's not looking good for them. They may very well need a full reset again. Very often it's a bad sign when the attackers need to do that even once. The high quality they have on the front line might be their saving grace if the attackers get some reinforcements in there quickly, which again, they seem to be dragging their heels. Dwarves are in behind enemy lines now. Next guard of Erebor. Ironfoot Pikes trying to nibble away at the side, but Goblin King's bodyguard are here. I mean, a charge into them. They are actually getting swallowed whole by those halberds. They may be able to assassinate the general here, which is a big deal. That general is right in and amongst those axe guard, but the axe guard are also wavering. Yeah, and they rout, unfortunately for them. 90 axe guard of Erebor. I have to say that the judgment here from the attackers has been pretty poor. For war goats, we are actually seeing some sort of attacking action here now. I mean, cycle charging into the Snaga archers will finally get them out of the way. But there are crossbows, 2 units of crossbows over here. So it's going to be a slow trudge up this hill, and the crossbows will be firing at them the whole time. Difficult to know where the attackers go from here, really. I think the lack of commitment from the army down here is a bit of a problem, because their allies up here are really struggling, and continued waiting is only going to result in problems later down the road for them, as well as the units that are up here. Dale, Blackshot Dragon Slayers and crossbows. I mean, this is also something they can potentially do to turn things around. It has been a punishing affair for the attackers so far, based on the skirmish presence they've been facing, but you can turn that around now. Crossbows from the attackers and armor-piercing arrows from the attackers, the sort of thing which can do a lot of damage very quickly. Late Town Infantry. For Pikes starting to establish a front line once again, but they're going to try and bludgeon through any sort of formation the dwarves are trying to set up, because they still have the numbers advantage here on the front line. Down come the Blackback Mountain Berserkers as well. Yeah, like, all of this commitment is now a sign that all of these units down here need to do something. They need to stop just sitting there. It's not going to get any easier if you just wait. So if you allow this to continue, the defenders will be victorious up here. Which one black card can be committed at any moment as well. Although the Blackback Mountain Berserkers are now retreating as a result of the ranged units they are faced with. So that's something. There's a lot of ranged units here as well, so a lot of damage can be done to any reinforcements that do come forwards. River Patrol getting hit by those crossbows. Is that the most efficient choice of target? Maybe not. Throwing axes coming in as well. Ironfoot throwing axes. Hitting the front line. Exactly the sort of thing which will be useful against the Witchround Pikemen and Heavy Goblin Halberdiers. Town Infantry adding themselves to the front line as well for more numbers, but again, we've already seen their shortcomings in melee so far in this battle. Maybe slightly more resilient mentally than you would have expected, but they certainly haven't been the sort of thing to help the attackers seize momentum up here. Still the projectiles come raining down. Barding Herd getting themselves onto the front line as well. Pikemen and the balance of forces is evenly matched. Done pretty well so far on the front line, these Angmar, but now they've tried to burrow in, and I think that now it's starting to work against them. With these reinforcements, they're partially surrounded. You don't want to be on the inside of an engagement that's going this way. And the Pikes struggling to re-establish their formation as well. A certainty for the Goblin Archers. Tron Blackguard being moved in, however. They took a fair amount of damage actually before being committed. Maybe took a little bit too long to get committed. Goblin Archers fleeing, 72 of them. Not the most important unit, but seeing units rout will be something which the attackers can take great heart in. It's the sort of thing which could be the beginning of a turnaround. Those crossbows finally out of ammunition, now being committed to the front line. Though another unit has taken its place. Units now firing most of their projectiles directly over the heads of the frontline engagement as well, so it's sort of ranged unit to ranged unit combat, which the attackers should win based on the factions involved. Snagger Archers, already been a surprisingly efficient unit in this battle so far. Further afield, Tron Blackguard continuing to do their thing, but Tron Pikemen now fleeing. Victory is a distinct possibility. Bolgs Champions. 2 units of Bolgs Champions. Highborns of Erebor making their way up. Ironfoot Halberds and Dwarves renewing an assault up this hill as well. So that's something at the very least. Attacking from multiple angles in earnest for the first time in this battle. We're 22,000 frames in. Axguard, Erebor, Legionaries and Ironfoot Spears as well. It seems certain for these heavy goblin halberds, who so far have just been a bit of a sticking plaster on the situation. They need more units in here somehow. Snaga skirmishers moving across, maybe to try and get some javelins into the side of this position, but they're getting hit pretty heavily by arrow fire as they attempt to do so. Here come the Bolgs Champions. Nice charge there into the side of the Axguard, who are wavering once again. I think this might have been the unit that routed earlier and then returned, so their morale is going to be a little bit more fragile as a result of that. Out of ammunition Archers routing almost immediately. In come the Highborns as well. Do they have any sort of support going forward? I mean, the Halberds are on the way up, but I don't think they'll get there in time to stop a second charge from the Bolgs Champions. Orc Fellas. We mentioned how timing could be everything with them if they can get a charge off, if they can add themselves to an engagement like this. This is where their armour piercing will be at its most effective. So that's good, although they are blocking a charge, another charge from the Bolgs Champions now, which is a bit of a concern. Ironfoot Wargoats going to get in amongst things as well, although the Bolgs Champions will tear them apart in melee, especially with a charge being landed like that. Just next to them, the Snaga Archers are wavering, in all fairness. Not a huge amount of damage done actually to the Wargoats there. Their defensive stats doing them great credit. Although this might be where things start to turn around. They're still going after the heavy goblin crossbows, but fair enough. Forward come the White Uruk Fearmongers, so this is starting to look like a fully enclosed position now. The cavalry will be able to do less for both sides. Charging forward at the Axguard, although they pull out of that charge last minute. They would have been better off just following through with that charge. I mean, it's not a great engagement for them. They're fighting uphill into a very nasty unit of armour-piercing polearms, and their own polearm support is very, very slow when they're having to deal with terrain like this. Are they starting to link up over here now? Yes, they are. They are starting to push through. Quality on all sides, and this is where the defenders probably have to start looking at some sort of wholesale retreat. This is now where the attackers can really start to claw their way back into parity in this battle in terms of kills. They may have already done so actually, which is a bad sign for the defenders. The King's Bodyguard scrambling to retreat. They need to retreat what they can to a better defensive position. I mean, in and around the front, probably not inside because of how open it is, but the very front of this Dwarven hold probably is the way to go. Still some snow trolls left alive trying to flit around and do what damage they can. And so forward come the bombarding herd, continuing their forward momentum here, which is important. The longer they dally, the more likely it is that stuff like these heavy goblin crossbows will be able to do a decent amount of damage. I mean, it has to be said, most of the defending infantry is still outside. I wonder, which is their plan? Are they going to try and retreat to the valley, perhaps, and not the hold? Be an interesting move. Dragon Slayers preventing the Orc fellas from retreating. And Axguard of Erebor. He would have struggled against the White Oak Fearmongers, but now working up the line, and well and truly now the attackers on top in this battle. Reorganisation and consolidation is needed from both sides, I think, actually, at this point. Heavy Goblin crossbows are leaving now. All of those Dwarven units that were hanging around, although it must be said, I think most of that Erebor quality that was here went up this pathway. Still a fair amount of units down there, in all honesty. Dex Jetster does have a fairly healthy army going into the late game. More so than his allies, but his allies are not down and out just yet either. Heavy Goblin Halberds are marching. Snider Skirmishers, so they are now going to retreat to the relative safety of the hold. Like I said, I think the bridge is actually the best bet they have. If they're worried about ranged units, then yeah, just inside the door and forming up a big defensive position around here is the way to go. Don't ask why the rain is coming through the mountain. An unavoidable thing, it would appear, in Medieval 2. They are going to retreat. Still the Bolgs champions. There are still units fighting out here as well. All of these Orc fellas revealing their ambush. Bolgs champions charging into the Ironfoot crossbows, doing a good amount of damage actually off that charge as well. And the Orc fellas going to do their best, but they're up against Highborns of Erebor. There goes a general though, one of the Erebor generals in the Dragon Slayer unit, so that'll be Smeagol has a Beard's general. We have seen a little bit of routing from the dwarves this time around, so it is possible. Still some Witchhound Blackguard as well. Everything's spread out a little bit, so the longer this engagement can remain the size that it is, the better it will be for the defenders, able to surround and do a fair amount of damage here to these Sons of Durin with a lowly unit of Orc fellas. All of these things may add up to give the defenders a little bit more hope going into the final phase of this fight. Alien Royal Guard also over here. The Warg Riders also making their presence felt now as well. I like this, they've managed to reveal their cavalry, and they will be able to charge into all of these more exposed units of archers, and it's a numbers game at this point, I think, for the defenders. If they can just kill as much in terms of numbers, doesn't necessarily have to be the quality. In terms of numbers, if they can do the business. Charging into the axe throwers there. Warg Riders are shaken, so they need to stay active for as long as possible here, these Warg Riders, and they do stabilise themselves. Trump Blackguard, the Bolgs champions, starting to take more and more damage the more charges they engage in. Warg Riders. More of a bump than anything else, although they do completely sandwich those Dragon Slayers, absolutely demolishing them. So that'll be a high quality unit they won't have to deal with later on. Good cavalry work. And also these Sons of Durin have also been completely destroyed as well, utterly surrounded by Orc fellas, so some pretty good efficient work here from the defenders, despite how the battle rapidly turned on them. On those outer defences, they have made good use of their ambush troops, their shock troops and their Orc fellas and their wargs to cut the attackers down to size a little bit, make them a little bit more manageable. That was a bold charge, however. Trying to go into the Dragon Slayers once again, but surely the Barding Herd will make the wargs pay for that. And they go after Warg Riders, could go after Ironfoot crossbows maybe? Into the back of the Ironfoot Spears again. Bold, but a good charge. More dwarves fall. Surely now these orc fellas will be approaching the end of their effectiveness, but they've already done a really good job killing off Sons of Durin, finishing off the Daelian Royal Guard. Any extra kills they get really are just a bonus. Can't ask for much more from units like this. Still some hidden Snaga archers as well, which could be used later on. Well, there goes the Angmar in general. Not too much of a surprise given the Blackguard were still fighting out here. Still 10 of them remain, but I don't think they're going to be able to get back inside the settlement at this point. Though heavy goblin crossbows shooting, Snaga skirmishes, it has turned into a little bit of a messy affair for the attackers, where once they had the wind in their sails, it does seem to have been broken up a little bit by that ambush. Now they need to consolidate once again and force the defenders back inside the hold and make it more of a structured battle again, because the longer these orcs are able to continue marauding around the field and getting these charges, the more confident the defenders will feel that their defence within the hold will be able to outlast what the attackers have left. Ooh, that might have been a bit of a mistake. Yeah, the Warg Riders rout as soon as they go near the Ironfoot Halberds. They've done pretty well up to this point, however. Yeah, the orc fellas now all gone. Routing. Still 4 Bolg's champions remain. Well, 9 if you count the 5 over here. Snaga skirmishers waiting. Heavy goblin crossbows. Content to continue taking pot shots into the dwarves as they move forwards. Again, depleted Bolg's champions though they may be, killing off a few more of the black shots who are no slouches in melee either. Good kills. Scourge Raiders reveal themselves. 2 units of them. Don't know if they still have ammunition. I don't think so. If they were the ones up on the hillside, then it will be a pure melee threat at this point. Forward come the Ironfoot Spears, and now is the time to retreat these crossbows. You can't afford to have crossbow bolts go to waste. And the spears at this point, I think, are going to be able to catch the crossbows. This is a little bit of an oversight there from Flame of the West, perhaps. I was going to say too busy looking after the Bolg's champions, but that's actually the other Misty Mountains player. This would be a big loss to sustain. Crossbows that still have ammo. Snaga throwing their javelins into the Ironfoots. Still very, very limited numbers of them. Yeah, and they finally tried to leave, but surely they'll rout as a result of doing this now that they're engaged. They just about get away with it. Flame of the West is very fortunate there, I think. Javelin still coming in, killing off as many of these Ironfoot Spears as possible. It's been an atrocious affair for the attackers to get into a position where they can finally start to try and reclaim the Dwarven hold. And the heavy goblin crossbows do rout, so Flame of the West did not get away with it in the end. Perhaps rightfully so. Guarding herd. And it's not a huge force that the attackers have left to them, is it? Enough, you would say. I think most of what the defenders were able to retreat was relatively basic. Still those Witchram Scourge Raiders, which the the attackers know is hiding over there. But what can they really do about it? Not a whole lot is the answer. Here, meanwhile. Defenders ready and waiting. The camera angle is going to be a bit of an annoyance here, isn't it? Because I can't actually get super close in. So hopefully the attackers can force the defenders back. And in fact, as a result of things, finally, there is actually some units over here as well. It's only Snaga Stalkers. I think 2 units of them, but Snaga Stalkers and Scourge Raiders, which could sweep in from the rear of this attacking force. Maybe not the worst thing in the world. May as well go up to times 6 speed, I suppose. Final Dwarven units on the way forwards now. So it is going to be mostly dwarves at this point, mostly Dex Jetster's army, considering he did hold back a lot in reserve earlier on, his allies bearing the brunt, but is this going to be enough? Is this Erebor army, a largely healthy Erebor army, going to be enough to seize control of this Dwarven settlement back? I do not know. The attack is yet to truly begin. These units over here, I mean, they know that the Scourge Raiders are over here. They don't know probably that the Snaga Stalkers also, so it is a fairly numerous force that. It is something which the attackers do have to consider pretty carefully. But how much do they commit up front? Because obviously the lion's share of their units will need to go into trying to smash through the frontal defence of the actual settlement itself. How much do they leave in the back to prevent that secondary force from making the difference? It's interesting. What did they just go? Is there a thing on the outside? Oh yeah, look at that. It's the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard. So I assume the plan there is to allow them to come in and then hit them from the side with probably the most dangerous single unit they have left really in the Hammer Guard. I think the Blackback Berserkers are here as well, and indeed they are, but I think the Hammer Guard all round, because of their slightly bulkier defensive stats, are going to be a little bit more dangerous. Sort of dancing around the issue. They are waiting for those Dwarven units to arrive on the front line, so time 6 speed was definitely the right call here. As we march ever closer towards the final 10,000 frames, the all-important final act of this battle. Could be anyone's as well, actually. Both sides have had their moment in the sun so far. I'd kind of like to see the defenders win, just because I think what they've done has been a little bit cleverer. But if the attackers do win, it will be as a result of good consolidation in their quality, so can't have too many complaints about that either. As we continue to wait, the Heavy Goblin Halberds. Lots of these units are pretty basic in nature. I mean, they do have obviously the Blackbacks, 2 units of Blackbacks as well. Depleted Goblin King's Bodyguard and the Hammer Guard, but a lot of it is Heavy Goblins, a lot of it is Snaga, even the relief force is mostly Snaga, so numbers wise, if you were to count each individual, the defenders probably do have a fairly significant edge, but much of it is going to have to be used very, very well. What is this? More Snaga. Still biding their time and waiting. I think this is it though. I think this is the moment when the fight truly begins. Heavy Goblin Spear is already exhausted. The armor piercing has already proven itself to be worthwhile so far. Crunching in from the sides. This was always going to be the case, however. It's just a matter of if the attackers are willing to send forward enough units. To make it so that this isn't such a problem. Trust in their quality, that sort of thing. Yeah, the White Hero Fearmongers could also be an incredibly important unit here. Oh, yeah, and that's going to be the main problem. So, yeah, this is as close to the fight as I can get as a result of the ceiling being too low in that area of the mountain. In come the Witchram Hammer Guard as well, an ideal unit for facing dwarves with their extreme levels of armor piercing damage. Javelins also coming in. Any kills they get in that blob will be worthwhile. Like I said, for the defenders it is a numbers game. Halberds, Fearmongers. The only problem is if the dam does burst for the defenders here, there's not really much they can do from stopping that particular train. The defenders don't have the quality to be able to deal with a large-scale momentum shift at this stage. Too many of their heavy goblins will rout, and then they do have high quality units which won't, but they won't be in high enough numbers, and that will be how the attackers can still potentially go on to win this. Snaga skirmishers still. Heavy goblin crossbows, very well, say that. Where's the rest of that unit? 141. Snaga skirmishers. Oh, I see, they're out here. This is actually very worthwhile. There's sort of like a real fire under the attackers, actually, because it means they have to charge in, otherwise they're going to continue to take a lot of damage from the crossbows. Another good move, that, from the defenders, and now the defenders have also sprung their surprise. Surprise in quotation marks, very bold quotation marks as well, because the attackers knew of the Scourge Raiders beforehand, but was there really anything they could have done to prevent this from being a little bit of a mess? There's a lot of Snaga to follow through with these Scourge Raiders as well, who are currently feasting on these very depleted Ironfoot crossbows. The black shots are pretty depleted though, although in conjunction with these crossbows they should have enough to deal with these Scourge Raiders, but at this point just keeping these units off the front line may be enough for the defenders. Routing as well from the dwarves. It's looking good for the defenders at the moment. Lots of Snaga as well. Obviously morale could be a bit of an issue. Some of them already shaken. Loss of the Angmar general earlier on probably playing a part in that. So really, the attackers, all of their eggs are in this basket. Can they force their way through? And it doesn't look like they can. It's looking like this dwarven hold may very well remain in goblin hands. Hammerguard as well. Dragon Slayers now, I think, with the numbers of the Snaga, I think this secondary assault is also going to be enough, because as soon as they start hitting that dwarven attack from the rear, there's still some Ironfoot halberds, there are still some axe throwers, but they've only just returned from routing. And again, the numbers game. I think this may very well be the end. It's a lot of Snaga. Snaga Stalkers being the hidden card that you're going to play in the late game is not too common, but here it is. It may be the thing which pushes the battle completely beyond the attackers. A rare enough thing. Scourge Raiders as well. Lake Town Pikes. Fighting going on the walls. Highborns of Erebor pushing their way up here, and they had to really to stop the crossbows from continuing to do their thing, but there's not enough of them. Only 7 remain, and Goblin King's bodyguard will be there to help finish them off as well. Saying that balance of force is now even. Could the quality yet play its part? Bloody hell. How annoying. Here it is then. We have to watch from afar. Heavy Goblin halberd struggling a little bit. A lot of wavering. Well, well, well. They need this secondary force outside the walls to get a bit of a shift on, really, so that they can have some sort of attack from the rear. Maybe put the dwarven morale under the pump as well. Ironfoot axe throwers in position as well to fire missiles. It's been a very topsy-turvy battle, this, hasn't it? And could there yet be one last sting in the tail for the defenders? Can the attackers somehow make this worthwhile? I mean, so far, I mean, earlier on in the battle, the attackers were very good at enveloping this kind of unit, but they're really allowing the Barding Herd and the Lake Town Pikes to have this fight their way could be absolutely vital as well. All these returning units as well could be vital. Axe throwers, it's the sort of damage which, again, maybe is always going to be calmer for the Scourge Raiders given their weapon of choice. Look at this. Blackback Mountain Berserkers getting around the side now. Hammer Guard still being the stalwart on the front line, but they will need to support those Blackbacks. They will get it, but is that going to be enough? Having a look at what's on the front line, I mean, Pikes, Ironfoot Pikes, Erebor Legionaries, there are some Highborns in there as well. Good combination of relatively defensive units actually, but certainly able to outlast the rank and file of what the defenders have left, although another unit of Blackbacks. There goes the Dalian General. I don't think that's going to be too much of a concern, because I don't think there's really any Dalians on this front line, which is the one the attackers really need to win. Barding Herd and Lake Town Pikemen now getting surrounded a little bit. Those Scourge Raiders going over to finally finish off those Ironfoot Axe Throwers. Those Halberds very slowly making their way forwards. The Snaga are shaken, but I think they see the urgency of the situation. They're going to try and get in and support the fights within the hold. As are these Scourge Raiders, I think, and you can see how slow the Halberds are, really making the difference. Being tired as well. Units routing. 80 Snaga Stalkers. Those Halberds may rout as a result of that Scourge Raider charge. A unit of Scourge Raiders getting into the rear, 85 of them. Could that be a real difference maker? I think the Snaga would be better off just trying to finish off these Lake Town Pikemen at this point. Try and finish off what you've already started, which shouldn't be too difficult. The Dwarves pushing through. When this engagement was all about being surrounded, it might have been a little bit different, but if they could make it, if they can get in and amongst all of these Halberds, they could force them to crumble pretty quickly. The Scourge Raiders do arrive. Heavy Goblin crossbows are in a good position to start shooting into the Dwarves' back as well, so this might be a good late game rally, but I don't know if it'll be enough for the attackers. They have managed to push all the way through. Is it too little too late though? I mean, technically they're on the interior side of the engagement now, so in a way they've reclaimed their hold. For how long that may be, I don't know. Victory still seems certain even with the newly arrived Scourge Raiders. Still a lot of Blackback Berserkers, mind you, still a lot of Goblin King's Bodyguard. I think that Misty Mountains quality might be the ultimate difference here. I mean, there's a lot of polearms involved for both sides as well, but this kind of engagement, it should be relatively easy to take away some of the effectiveness of polearms. Goblin crossbows are shaken. The exterior engagement has gone the way of the attackers. All of those Snaga trying to push through, and in the end a mistake, routing. So the final reinforcements to this fight will be a few Dalian polearms. Could that yet prove to be the difference? Blackback Berserkers and Scourge Raiders. Those Dalians may be needed very quickly. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Well, victory almost a certainty. Charge coming in from what remains of the Bold Champions as well, trying to get out of here to shoot the crossbows, who have been a constant thorn. I think if they were to pick an individual unit that had been their biggest adversary, the attackers, they would have to go heavy Goblin crossbows, I would assume. That's no great surprise. We all know the effectiveness of crossbows in this kind of situation. Here come the Dalians now. Is it too little too late? Having a look at the percentages of kills. The defenders are ahead by 1%. And they do have the quality to back that advantage up. And the numbers, of course, relative proportions. Having to chase those crossbows way back into the open space of this vast hall. Scourge Raiders. The announcer raised their chances, although that warg just hurtled in and got immediately cut down by one of the dwarves. It's really annoying not to be able to get closer into this engagement. I guess this is where we shall view it from. I guess actually ×2 speed would probably be appropriate from here. The Blackback Berserkers and Goblin King's bodyguard, the great and the good of the Misty Mountains army, tasked with finishing the dwarves off. Scourge Raiders that did come in and were a help, but ultimately have routed. Put under a lot of pressure. Still polearms though in this fight. Halberds only 9. Blackback Berserkers don't have the most staying power of a unit of their type, so maybe all is not lost. Legends of Erebor though depleted at this stage. 3 Barding Herd return. Still 1% the difference. Blackback Berserkers lost a lot of units there just by trying to re-maneuver. That might be it then. The final Dwarven units starting to crumble. 98 to 98. To be fair, the Dwarves did pull it back to dead even percentages. The amount of routing from both sides, probably a little bit more so for the defenders, honestly, but of course, larger armies probably for the defenders, given the focus that they had. Ironfoot spears. Not much left though, is there? Just a few units from Flame of the West, 3 of them, both of his bodyguard units and a unit of heavy goblin crossbows, all that remains to the defenders. These Ironfoot spears look to be the final unit on the field, I think. Maybe not. It is the final unit then. They're not fighting anything anymore. Something on the outside then. Red Star over here. Yeah, 1 Blackshot Dragon Slayer. You'll charge forward. Marching on the Lake Town Pikemen. They're really going to... Halberd's actually still alive as well, technically. 4 of them. Renewing themselves. It's not going to help them, of course. Yeah, this is ×6 speed. This is nonsense. Dale, technically, I guess the last one's left with any sort of threat to them. Yeah, they rout instantly. There was really no need for any of that. Halberds are out. And that is going to be that. So there we have it. I think that's probably one of the better battles I've shown in quite a while, to be honest. The defenders managing to eke out a victory there. Again, the defenders going for certainly a more numbers-heavy approach, which is maybe understandable given their Misty Mountains and Angmar, but I think the temptation is always to go quality-heavy regardless of what faction you are, you know, with the tools that you have at your disposal. The attackers As I mentioned throughout, I think they were able to consolidate at moments in the battle, and they were able to really leverage their quality and gain the momentum at times, but I do think the right result was reached here. Early on, I think the defenders were able to find gaps. They were constantly able to find gaps, actually, with the ambushes. You know, the late game one with the Scourge Raiders and the Snaga coming forward to go in from the rear, and also the Orc Fellas and the Wargs were used very, very well. I think that was probably the most impressive thing in the battle. And also early on with the Bolgs Champions and the Trolls going after stuff like the River Patrol and the Archers. All of those things hitting the attackers where it hurt, I think, was very key, especially given the relatively narrow margin of victory in the end. I think it really does go to show that the attackers, with that quality advantage, would have won if the defenders didn't play as well as they did in those moments. So, yeah, huge credit to them for that. Let's see what did the damage then for Farkin's army, playing as Angmar. Resisted the temptation to go for the Witches, which is nice. Hammerguard did okay in the late game, considering the quality they were faced with. Barrow-wights, early game Bulwark. Scourge Raiders, very, very impressive, of course, and obviously that was a dual thing. Early on they were using their throwing axes, and late on used as that relief force, really, and they did really reasonably well at that as well. Good amount of kills. Obviously, given the fact that the defenders were more numbers focused, you don't expect huge kill counts, but Warg Riders did very, very well. The Orc Fellas, not a huge amount in terms of, well, in terms of quantity, that's actually fine, especially when you consider stuff like the Sons of Durin, Ironfoot Spears, the remains of the Dalian Raw Guard were in and amongst all of those kills, so very, very good for that. But mostly, of course, more of a defensive effort. Interesting to see no Guardians of Khan Doom. Good and bad guard, obviously much more about the quality-quantity split here. And I think that was more of a universal thing as well. I think Colonel Speaks 46 was almost entirely numbers focused with an army of that size. Flame of the West with a little bit more quality, but it was also that quality that saw them over the line in the late game. So, yeah, really good synergy, really good battle this, and it is based around a module which we have seen before. That Dwarven Hold is something we've seen in a couple of battles before, but the outer area is where most of the fighting took place, and that is entirely Farkin's creation, I believe. So big thank you to him for creating this map. Of course, it is worth repeating that this is on the old version of the game. It's not new patch stuff, this, but we'll see. And like I said, this is also the final battle I have in my current backlog before it has once again run dry. So we'll see what the future holds in terms of what next battle there will be. But yeah, we'll see, I think. Big thank you to Farkin once again for sending this battle replay to me and for creating this map. Colonel Speaks 46 also sent it to me, so yeah, thank you to him. Thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle.